is Allyson, and I grew up here in Miami. Had a really good childhood. I grew up with two very loving parents who gave me everything I wanted. I didn't really want for anything. It was a very typical 4-unit family household. I have a younger brother, a mom and a dad. I went to school. I did extracurricular activities. We went on vacations. We had holidays. And there was nothing ever really wrong with how I grew up or in my house, you know. But as I was going through school and adolescence, I guess, I started to kind of fall into my sexual identity and how I liked to express myself, as far as, you know, the way I dressed and how I acted, and, you know, the stuff I liked. And, you know, I kind of battled with my mom a lot when I was young on those kind of things, and, you know, I barely knew what I was going through, so I really didn't know how to take my mom's reaction to the stuff I was going through. And it just felt like my mom was kind of dismissing me and my issues at the time, and, you know, putting other things in front of how I was feeling. And I just felt like I couldn't really talk to her openly about what I was going through, which created a rift between her and I. And that was when I kind of started to just kind of shift away from being, you know, comfortable in my own home. So I seeked other places of comfort. And, you know, by the time I reached 15, I had kind of sat my parents down and came out to them about my sexual identity. And my mom was still kind of stuck on the fact that I dressed a certain way or appeared a certain way to people, and again felt like she just dismissed, you know, what I was trying to tell her, and didn't ever listen to what I was saying, you know. So it caused a lot of confusion, right? And I was young and didn't know how to work all that out and work through that. So when I reached high school and I kind of was introduced to smoking weed and acting out and stuff, I kind of held on to that and went with that. And I didn't realize at the time that it was a form of escape I was using. But that's what I was doing, kind of. And I just didn't want to be at home. And I started to skip school and do things like that. Academically, I always did really well. And I kind of had a goal set on going to college in order to get away from Miami. So I dabbled in a couple of drugs in high school, but nothing ever really affected me in a sense that my life changed significantly at all. I still did really well in school. I still did, you know, I played sports. I was into music, and I still excelled in all of that stuff. You know, I traveled to Italy in my junior year of high school. You know, I was just always into normal things, and there was no sign of trauma or abuse or anything in my life that you would think would lead me to fall into, you know, drug use or addiction. And when I went to college and I was kind of on my own, I kind of just went off the rails, and I was able to party a lot because I didn't have any bills to pay. My tuition was paid for, my rent was paid for, and I started to sell weed, large amounts of weed, and was making a lot of money that was just going into my pocket. And I started using it to travel, to party, to do things that I always wanted to do away from home. And I ended up being introduced to a lot of different drugs and a lot of different parts of society and people that did things that I never knew about. And I kind of just I really dove into all of that.
What were some of those things?
A lot of clubbing, a lot of drug use, a lot of festivals, tripping, rolling, a lot of lifestyles that were kind of no responsibilities, and no accountability, and just
Why do you think that you why do you think that you wanted to escape from accountability and responsibility?
Because the way my house was, even though it wasn't strict, there was always structure, and it was very redundant. My parents got up every morning and went to the same job and came home at the same time and did the same things. And my parents never, we traveled and stuff, but my parents didn't drink, they didn't use drugs. Everything that I did as far as partying, I kind of did with them, so without even realizing it was kind of restricted, and they kind of always had their hand over my eyes, when they needed to. So when I got to college and I had all this money and I had all this free time and I had all this freedom, right? I saw things that I kind of hadn't seen yet, and I was also under 18 before. So, a lot of things I just wasn't introduced to yet. And a lot of things I also was ignorant about, right? So for example, when I started to use painkillers, right, eventually, I had no idea that you could become addicted to these pills. And I had no idea that you became physically dependent on them, or that you would withdraw or detox from them. I just knew that I tried them, I liked them, and I could afford to do them every day. And that's kind of what got me hooked on them without even realizing that I was doing that, So after a lot of drug-related experiences, that involved more recreational drugs, the club life and the festival life and, raves and all that, I was introduced eventually to painkillers, and I used them heavily. And then I kind of just left to California for 2 weeks, which was a trip that had been planned for a while. And when I got to California, kind of the second night I was there, I started to feel sick, and I didn't know it had anything to do with withdrawals or detoxing or anything. And it was explained to me by somebody back in Tallahassee, where I went to school, over Facebook, that what I was going through probably was related to not having those pills with me. And when I realized that, the addiction part of it kind of took hold, and I realized that I was suffering in some kind of way, and there was a cure for it, right? And in order to take it away, I needed to do these pills, right? And it was very like 1 + 1 makes 2. So by the time I came back from California, I was kind of over the withdrawals, but at the same time, I was kind of glorifying, getting back and getting high on them again. So that's what I did. And this time around, it was different because I knew I couldn't go without them.
So you weren't afraid of falling back into that now that you became aware,
right,
that there was a physical dependency?
No, actually, like it because I hadn't had a problem obtaining them yet, like getting them. I hadn't fallen into any issues having the pills. So it was kind of like, as long as I could get them, I'd be fine, right? So I wasn't anticipating the part where I ran out of money or I ran out of ways and means to get them. I wasn't like there yet. So, my mind was just kind of set on, as long as I have these pills, I'll be fine. And that's kind of what I went with. And it took a different course because of that at the same time, like I knew I couldn't be without these pills. I knew I couldn't run out of money to get these pills, and I knew I couldn't run out of places or ways to get these pills. So as much as I was able to get them, at the same time there was a fear of not having them. So eventually I ran out of money. Eventually I ran out of, things to sell, or, and
how much were you using each day?
At the time, the pills were going for like $10 a piece, sometimes $8 if I bought enough. And in one line, my tolerance was at the point that I was snorting them, so at one line I would crush up like 4 or 5 pills. So that's like a $50 line, and multiple times a day.
And what pills were these?
Roxy's, 30 milligram Oxycontin. And I got to a point where I was in Tallahassee going to school, and I woke up one morning and didn't have the pills. I didn't have any money, and I was sick. And I kind of just called my mom, who has no idea about any of this, or has no experience in dealing with any kind of addiction. And I called her, who was back here in Miami, and I told her, what was going on. I kind of filled her in on everything I had been doing, and I told her I have a problem that I need help solving because I can't seem to keep up with this anymore. So she did her research, I guess, and she was able to place me in an outpatient treatment center here in Miami in the summer. So I took the summer semester off at school, and I went into treatment for the first time, and that worked for about 8 months. And then I met up with somebody who I had been getting high with before, and got high again with them. And I got kicked out of the treatment center, and I went back to school. I kind of just kept up with the addiction as much as I could. I graduated eventually, and the last semester that I had at Florida State, my advisor got me an internship to work with the public defender's office down here in Miami. So the last semester I did was down here before I graduated.
And what were you studying, by the way?
I was studying criminology. Hoping to go into like criminal defense law. And so I interned with the public defender's office, and they assigned me to work with the attorney who worked in felony drug court. So when I interned with them for a year, I was interning in felony drug court and getting high and keeping it, on the down low, and nobody really knew I was doing it. And at the end of the internship, they actually hired me to work for them. So I went back to Tallahassee to graduate. After I graduated, I came back down here to work with the public defender's office, and they reassigned me to work in jail arraignment and bond hearing. So I was no longer working in drug court, but still working for the same office. And eventually I was arrested for the first time in my life for a bunch of possession charges. And when I went to jail and I called my parents, my mom by then knew what was going on, and she knew that I had kind of upgraded to heroin instead of the pills. And so now I was injecting heroin, and I got arrested. So my mom thought the best idea was to leave me in there for a few days instead of bailing me out, so that I could go through the detox, you know. And she had no idea what jail looked like or what the detox even looked like, you know. So eventually a few days later she bonded me out, but because I was in there for a few days, when the jail took me to go to court to see the judge, because of my charges, I appeared in felony drug court where I had been working for them.
Did they recognize you?
Yeah. They didn't right away because I was in orange and I was in the box with the other inmates. So it wasn't until they called my name to stand up that all the people that I worked with kind of like, you know, it caught their attention, and they looked at me and they saw me and they freaked out. And then they looked at my charges and they saw my charges and they freaked out. And they were totally caught off guard because they didn't know about any of the stuff I had been doing. So, needless to say, I ended up getting fired as a result of that. And from the point that I got fired in 2013, early 2013, to when I got clean in 2015, late 2015, I had been arrested 14 times. So I was in and out of jail, I was in and out of treatment. My addiction like took full hold of my life.
How did you transition from, just before you continue from that point forward, how did you transition from the pills to the heroin?
So the pills became like impossible to get because the DEA was regulating them at this point in South Florida, or in Florida actually. And the pills, even now, if you can even find them, cost $30 a pill. And I mean, you really got to know somebody that knows somebody that has pills to even sell you. So when the pills became harder and harder to get, getting sick wasn't an option. So the next best thing was heroin. And the way it was presented to me was in the form of an IV. So that's what I did. And that's kind of what I got stuck in, because after you do that, you know, snorting something isn't the same as the feeling you get from that. So it's hard to go backwards. And when I got fired, it was kind of like that was the only anchor to like normalcy that I still had. And so when I lost that job, I was kind of just, you know, lost. And the only thing I knew was waking up, needing drugs, going to get drugs, doing drugs, going to sleep, waking up, needing drugs, you know, and the same thing over and over again. And obviously, you know, as your tolerance goes up and you run out of ways to do this, you know, you start committing crimes, you start stealing, you start doing things you don't really want to be doing. You know, I started to steal from my family.
Were you still living at home at this
I was still living at home, yeah. I couldn't afford not to live at home. So, so that was, you know, a lot of chaos for those almost 3 years. Was just treatment, jail, Overtown, treatment, jail, Overtown, you know, stealing.
Sorry if I came out in the video, but I think you should have.
Oh, thank you. I appreciate
Thank you. That's so sweet.
Yeah, right? So,
That was awesome.
yeah, so I was in and out of jail a lot. My parents were kind of like running out of ideas of what to do with me. And then I caught a case that was enough, because I had kind of just been skating by every time I went to jail and went to court. Either my charges were dropped or they offered me some kind of like program that I could get my charges dropped. And I kind of caught a case that was enough that, you know, the presumed like result was going to be going to prison. So the drug court judge actually was able to pull me into her court and give me the option of actually going through a year in drug court and doing what they wanted me to do in order to have the charges dropped at the end. At the end of it, instead of, you know, having my case in the regular felony division and possibly going to prison. So,
were you successful with the drug court?
I agreed to do the drug court, and at first I was not successful. I was going from one treatment to another treatment, and for the first like 2 weeks I ran from treatment. I had a warrant. I was still trying to get high. It was a horrible idea because I had no phone, I had no money, I had nothing, you know, when I left the treatment center. So I made it happen for like 2 weeks miserably, and then I kind of got picked up again on my warrant and got placed in another treatment center. I did 63 days in jail, and then they placed me in another treatment center. And at that point I kind of was tired. You know, I was really tired, and at first it was really difficult because they hadn't put me on the right medication. So I was struggling with the withdrawals and, you know, the anxiety and everything that you struggle with coming off of drugs. So I was very, I wasn't able to like stay in my seat, and I did leave at one point, but I came right back, and they took me to court. And I knew that when I went to court, when they took me to court, I knew that because of the last time I was in court, that the judge was gonna put me in prison. You know, like that is what she told me the last time I was in court, that if I messed up again and I ended up in court again, she was going to transfer my case out and, you know, have it dealt with appropriately. So when they took me to court, that's what I was expecting. And instead, you know, I kind of told the judge how I was feeling and that I was exhausted of this. And for whatever reason, the way that I said it, she knew it wasn't a lie this time. So all she did was she made an appointment with a psychiatrist right away and had me put on Suboxone to get off the dope. And from that point forward, I completed treatment. I was in inpatient treatment for 4 months and outpatient treatment for another 8 months, which made a year. And I stayed clean for that year. I stayed clean for another year after that. And
do you remember the judge's name?
Yeah, Jerry Cohen.
She sounds like a good judge. One of the good ones.
She is, yeah. And so I stayed clean. I stayed clean for like 2.5 years. I kind of got my shit together. I had my own apartment in a high rise. I was working.
Where were you working?
I was bartending, but at a very like high-end like craft cocktail bar. It wasn't like a party scene at first, and it was good. Everything was really good.
Was that Lost Boy that you were telling me about?
No, that's the last bar I ended up working at. The first bar I worked at was Broken Shaker on the beach. So,
but working in the bar environment, were there ever any like temptations to use or drink?
It wasn't until like the bar I ended up working at a little later that I never drank. There was never a temptation to drink. I never drank. I never liked drinking. And even the drugs that I ended up being around, my coworkers kind of knew my situation, and they knew that I wasn't using drugs and that I was clean from drugs. And there was never really like a temptation until the day came that I kind of just made the decision that I wanted to get high again. And that's what I did. I didn't use dope right away. I started using cocaine. I used marijuana first, but I was using weed and still being able to keep everything together. You know, weed wasn't opening any doors. It wasn't affecting me. I was using weed for like a year without anything, you know, being negatively affected. So
would you say it was a decision you made, or was it like, oh, I'm smoking weed again and I'm okay, maybe I gotta try this and I'll be okay?
I when I started smoking weed again, I definitely had that conversation with myself. You know, I asked myself if this was gonna be a problem, you know, but it wasn't, and I was still doing everything that was doing before that and taking the medication I was on the right way. And, you know, it was fine. So, but I also knew that I couldn't do anything else that the same way, you know? So eventually, like, it was a mixture of things. It was the conversation that started to come up about me getting off the medication I was on, because now I was kind of dependent on the Suboxone. And even though I had been tapering down and taking like a very minimal level, like minimal amount of it, eventually it came up that I needed to stop taking it. So that came up along with the environment I started to work in at that point, which was on South Beach, and it was really crazy, and there were a lot of drugs around, and, you know, and the fear too of like not having the Suboxone, and it was just a bunch of things kind of like collided, and I started to use cocaine at work. And then it became a thing where like I couldn't go to work without cocaine. So I wasn't using it every day. If I didn't work that day, I never even thought about using cocaine. And it wasn't even like a fight or a battle. It was just, you know, but if I worked, I needed cocaine, you know, and it was kind of because I worked better, I worked faster. It made work go by quicker, you know, that I got used to working with cocaine. So that became kind of like an addiction in itself. And then, you know, I stopped the Suboxone, so in order to come off the cocaine, I started to use Xanax. And then it was kind of when I was high on Xanax that I decided I could use dope one time and shot heroin again. But this time it wasn't heroin, it was fentanyl, because the heroin wasn't around anymore. And I was scared shitless to use fentanyl, because that transition happened during the time that I was clean. And a lot of people I knew died and were dying, and I knew I had been clean for a while. So I definitely didn't want to just jump into fentanyl like that. But I did, and, you know, at the moment I was convinced it was only going to be for that night. But in the morning when I woke up, the first thing I did was, you know, go want to get high and find more, and, you know, the tools and all that. And then I kept getting high from then out. And at first I was still working, I still had some money in the bank, you know, and I was able to keep maintaining the life I had while using dope again. But that stopped very fast, you know, like that. It became a problem again very quickly. I got fired again. I ended up getting another job at Lost Boy, and again was able to kind of keep it together until COVID. And when COVID kind of shut everything down and I wasn't working anymore, I was able to get a bunch of free money from the government. And my best friend Laura and I were living at her house in Hollywood, and we had lived together for years before that. She's, you know, very familiar with me and my addiction, and she had dealt with it for like 8+ years before that, and very gracefully. And so she knew what time it was, and she was also getting high by this point. And we just had a lot of money. She had a lot of money saved up. I was getting a lot of money from the government. And we were just getting high a lot. And
only on fentanyl, or?
She didn't use fentanyl. She only used crack at the time. I used fentanyl and crack at the time. And eventually, you know, things just crashed and burned as they usually do with addiction. And we ended up, you know, going from her house in Hollywood to the apartment we lived in before in South Beach, to getting evicted from our apartment in South Beach, to living out of my car, to losing my car, to living in abandoned places, and kind of going our own ways for a while, then coming back together and living where we live now, in a house that is technically abandoned, but you wouldn't know it. Like, we have water, we have electricity. At the moment, we don't have water, but we usually have water, electricity. The house is cleaned up for the most part, you know, and we live there. We live there with other roommates, and, you know, it's as normal as an abandoned house can be, you know, and...
So you guys are essentially squatters there?
Right, yeah, and, you know, my addiction now is, you know, fentanyl and crack, and I live there with my girlfriend who's also addicted to fentanyl and crack, and we kind of just make it happen somehow. You know, we do whatever we have to do. I steal, she does what she does, and, you know, the goal is just to keep getting high, I guess. And, you know, it becomes so life-consuming, like so all-consuming, that you lose touch with, you know, what normal looks like, you know, or what, like, having a job and not being on drugs and, you know, all that looks like. So the conversation about getting sober or getting clean, you know, it's very, like, far out right now. I know from my prior experience with it that at the moment, you know, I don't have the desire really to get clean. Whether that's like a fear of, like, kind of taking responsibility for everything and kind of like facing, you know, the things that you kind of need to deal with to change your way of life. It could be that, you know, it's probably that, but you know, I'm not, like, totally discontent with my life right now. I know that I'm, like, making my life harder than it needs to be, you know, but I don't know, the part of this culture that I'm living in is kind of, like, enough for me. I don't know.
And how much do you have to use each day to satisfy your habit now?
Now the way things have been, I kind of just, I'm doing what I can get, you know? But ideally, I shoot 2 bags of fentanyl at a time, and, you know, the crack is just, you know, as much of it that you know, comes along that day. There's not, like, a set amount that I have to do. It's not, like, physically, it's not a physical dependence like the fentanyl, but yeah, the fentanyl, I have to have it. And until I do a certain amount of it, you know, when I wake up or at the beginning of my day, I don't feel right to do anything. So,
how expensive is your habit? How much do you spend a day?
If I had it to, you know, if I had the money that I would like to have at the moment for that, I would probably say I would probably spend $100 a day on the fentanyl, $80 to $100 a day.
Are you still in touch with your family?
Yeah, I'm in touch with my brother mostly, almost daily. My mom I speak to every now and then, but my brother kind of, like, relays messages. My dad I haven't spoken to in a while because it's kind of, like, emotional, I guess. But I haven't seen them in a long time. But they know where I'm at. And they know what I'm doing, which is kind of the reason for me not seeing them. Because, you know, after so much trying and turmoil and me deciding to do the other thing, my mom kind of just said, you know, told me that if I'm going to live this way, just to kind of keep it away from them, which I understand. My brother's going on, like, 4 years clean, I think, and I don't want it to muddle with his stuff, you know, and it's a lot of chaos for somebody that doesn't live that way, you know. So I understand, like, you know, that decision.
And how old are you, by the way?
33.
Still young.
Yeah.
When you picture like the next 5 years or even 10 years, is there ever any point in the future that you see yourself not doing this?
Yeah. I mean, I hope for a point in the future that I'm not doing this, you know?
So you hope that you see an end to it at some point.
Yeah, for sure.
People talk about hitting like a rock bottom.
Right.
Do you think that's what it is? Do you think you haven't hit that yet?
I think it's that. I think like the point of exhaustion that I reached at one point when I did get clean is kind of like the rock bottom. I also think like I'm at an advantage because, you know, there's people that end up in this situation or end up in this place that don't have like family support, that don't have education, that don't have like any reason to kind of say like, you know, there should be an end to this, or like there is something else, you know? And even those people, like, you know, do have the option to live differently, you know, without drugs. But I'm at an advantage in the sense that like I know that way of life, and I know that way of life is sitting somewhere waiting for me to like choose to do that, you know? Like it's kind of like somebody that would have to build all that up and create all that for themselves is kind of already there for me, you know?
Yes, you are at quite the advantage then.
Yeah. I don't think somebody that's never been in this position would completely understand it, you know, but it's kind of like when I started to get high, I never anticipated I'd be here, right? So like over the course of getting high and, you know, as the damage was being done, you do reach a point where this life and getting high and living this way is better than, you know, stepping up and taking responsibility for all of the stuff that has been done and all the amends that you have to make, and kind of like, it's kind of like a stage fright feeling, you know, like you don't want to like pull back the curtain and say like, you know, I did all this, or I don't want to do all this anymore. You have to go from the liar to being honest. You know, you have to go from the thief to not stealing, you know, like, and you have to gain trust from people that you broke trust with, you know, and all of that is very difficult to do without drugs, you know, because now you're just not getting high, but you're still being looked at the same way for a while before, you know, like you prove yourself to be different, you know, and so like that's a very heavy toll on somebody that's been avoiding it for so long, you know, and it's a complete shift in like your way of thinking and your behaviors, and you know, so it's a lot more than just putting down the drugs, you know, it's a lot harder.
What would you like to do with your life if you didn't have to struggle with addiction?
I was supposed to go to law school. I don't know. Now I don't know what I would do. When I got into bartending, I really loved bartending, you know, and I say like I would like to go back to bartending, and then, you know, like if anything, see about going back to school then, but I liked bartending even before I started to get high again, you know, like, and I liked that whole industry, you know, so I don't know what I would do like work-wise, you know, but I know like if I were to get clean, like I would be present again in a lot of places, like my family, you know, and I don't know, I can't really say.
Do you feel deserving of a life like that?
Yeah.
I think everyone is deserving of it. But some people don't feel that way.
Right.
You know?
Right. Yeah, that's true. That sucks.
What about your tattoos? Are there any stories behind those?
No. This is just like a Super Mario sleeve, and it's kind of like, kind of for my brother who like loves video games, but also for me because I like Super Mario, and it's kind of like a parallel between, like the obstacles he has to go through, you know, like, and like the levels get harder and stuff, and just like life, you know what I mean? And my wrist here says role model, which I got while I was already getting high, and it was kind of like a satire, like a sarcastic thing, you know, but it's one of my favorite tattoos. This says Colin Grimes, and it was one of my best friends who died from fentanyl, actually. And he didn't even use fentanyl. It was just laced in something else he was using. And he died at a party from an overdose, and it was fucked up.
Are you afraid of overdosing?
I've overdosed before, you know, but obviously I'm still alive.
Well, I guess, are you afraid of...
I don't want to die from it.
Are you afraid of dying?
I don't know if I'm afraid of dying, but I definitely don't want to die from using fentanyl.
But are you afraid of dying so young and not living there, like,
Yeah.
seeing what else there is
Yeah.
to live for?
Yeah.
What's the farthest you've gone to get high?
Anything and everything you can think of shy of like sex work. So anything besides sex work I've done.
Are you open to talking about some of the things that you've seen over the years, you know, living in Overtown and spending a lot of time there and around other addicts and things like that?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen a lot of, you know, desperation. I've seen a lot of people like lose themselves, you know. I know that like a lot of people are in the same place as me as far as like, you know, this is kind of good enough for now, and whatever it is they're doing is good enough for now. But I know at the end of the day what they're doing is not what they chose to be doing, you know, when all this started for them.
Do you have any regrets about any of this?
Yeah, there's a lot of regrets. There's a lot of stuff, you know, that I've done, a lot of positions I put myself in, you know, that if it wasn't for the drug dependence, I would never have done it, you know? And it you could say regret. It's not so much of regret as much as like, you know, I know, I am very like consciously aware of the fact that like certain things I have to do for that reason, you know, and it's not like something that I would do, you know, if it wasn't because of that.
And outside of your addiction, you know, at the times you were clean, what were some of the things that you were into? I played basketball my whole life. I love playing basketball. I played saxophone. I love jazz music. If it wasn't for the fact that I pawned my saxophone at some point for drugs, you know, if I had a saxophone, I'd play it. I'm into, you know, I'm into graffiti. I'm into skateboarding. And do you have like a tag name?
yeah, my tag name is Cosmic. It's Kosmik, and the last K is backwards. And it's all over Miami. I would like to travel and put it a bunch of other places, but I'm kind of like restricted from doing that at the moment.
All right, is there anything else any other experiences or things of your story that you feel like you might have left out or that you want to say?
No.
Think we covered it all?
Yeah, maybe in like a follow-up interview.
A follow-up interview when you're clean?
Maybe, yeah.
All right, Allyson, thank you for talking to me.
Yeah.